about obstructive sleep apnea, which is the second part of the CME that we are having today. I'll be mainly discussing what is obstructive sleep apnea, who is at risk of OSA, diagnosis of OSA in children and the importance of polysomnography, and the treatment options. So I want to start with a case. We had an 18-month-old girl, firstborn, who presented with noisy breathing during sleep, snoring, chest indrawing and neck retractions, which were there only during sleep, and frequent night awakenings. And these symptoms were noticed by the parents since last 1 month. She had history of repeated nose blocks and sneezing throughout infancy. She had 2 episodes of hospital admission for cough requiring inhaled bronchodilators, and she was a mouth breather. Family history of atrophy was also strongly positive. Father had allergic rhinitis, and paternal grandmother had asthma. However, she didn't have any daytime symptoms of reduced playtime or decreased activity, and her neonatal period was uneventful. On examination, she was growing fairly well, and her ENT examination showed inferior turbinate hypertrophy and grade 3 tonsillar enlargement. Her systemic examination was more or less normal. This was a video that we made of the patient in the ward, which shows significant net retractions. There's some nasal flaring, there is snoring, and she's a mouth breather. So there were signs of significant labored breathing during sleep. This was an X-ray soft tissue neck, which shows enlargement of the adenoids, which is almost completely occluding the upper airway. In her polysomnography, there were a total of 20 events, 12 obstructive apneas and 8 hypopneas, with a AHI of 3.4. And her nadir, SpO2 nadir was 76%. So she had mild obstructive sleep apnea. We also did a skin prick test for her, which was positive for cockroach and house dust mite. So this was clearly a case of mild obstructive sleep apnea, the etiology being tonsillo-adenoid hypertrophy, secondary to allergic rhinitis. She underwent TNA surgery, and her intranasal steroids, mometasone, was started at a dose of 50 micrograms in bilateral nostrils. On follow-up, she was significantly relieved. Her nasal symptoms were much better, and she had no snoring. So this was a typical case of obstructive sleep apnea, how they present to us, and how this was very clear cut. But the story is not always so black and white. There are a lot of gray areas. Obstructive sleep disordered breathing. In the obstructive sleep disordered breathing, there are the habitual snorers, where they have snoring or noisy sleep without management of childhood obstructive sleep apnea syndrome. And they define OSA as a disorder of breathing during sleep characterized by prolonged partial upper airway obstruction and or intermittent complete obstruction that disrupts normal ventilation during sleep and normal sleep patterns. So in simple terms, it is intermittent or prolonged, partial or complete airway obstruction, leading to abnormal ventilation, and fragmented or inadequate sleep. It is not an uncommon disease. The prevalence rates range from 1.2 to 5.7%. In India, the incidence of OSA is nearly 10%. Of the children with habitual snoring, approximately 2 to 3% may have clinically relevant disease. In the pediatric age group, the OSA occurs in 2 peaks, First peak is around 3 to 6 years, where the main reason is upper airway obstruction because of enlarged tonsils or adenoids. And the second peak is in the adolescent age group, 15 to 19 years, where it is associated with weight gain. Prevalence of allergic rhinitis in children with sleep disorders is more than 40%. And adenoid hypertrophy is seen in 92.6% of children with AR. And we know that adenotonsillar hypertrophy is a main cause of OSA in young children. So clearly, allergic rhinitis has a strong association with obstructive sleep apnea. Which children are predisposed to OSA? Children with anatomical obstruction like adenoid or tonsillar hypertrophy, obesity, children with Down syndrome or other neurological disorders leading to hypotonia or neuromuscular disorders, children with craniofacial deformities, chronic lung disease, sickle cell anemia, metabolic diseases, or laryngomalacia. What happens in obstructive sleep apnea? In sleep apneas, there is continuous hypoxemia and hypercapnia happening during sleep, along with sleep fragmentation and repeated intrathoracic pressure swings. Because of these reasons, there is a hyperinflammatory state going on in the body. There's a systemic inflammatory response and release of release of various cytokines. There is also an autonomic nervous system dysfunction leading to sympathetic overdischarge. Because of these reasons, because of the hyperinflammatory state, there is increased neuronal loss, which leads to neurobehavioral disorders. And in the heart, the inflammation causes endothelial dysfunction, causing LV dysfunction, pulmonary hypertension. Apart from this, because of the hypoxemia and hypercapnia, there is insulin resistance, increased insulin resistance in these patients, leading to metabolic syndrome and somatic growth impairment. Metabolic syndrome is a vicious circle of obesity, insulin resistance, hypertension, dyslipidemia. And even though obesity causes both OSA and metabolic syndrome, there are several studies that show a direct causal relationship between metabolic syndrome and OSA, irrespective of obesity. So when do we screen for OSA? Do we screen every child who's snoring for OSA? Practically, most of the children with OSA snore. Niemann et al. Evaluated 58 children and found that 50% of them had OSA. Another reason why snoring should ring a bell in our heads is because snoring is underreported by parents. Parents must be routinely asked about snoring. In a study done in USA, only 8% of parents reported snoring as a symptom amongst children who were snorers, frequent snorers. So the American Academy guidelines gave us some nighttime symptoms and daytime symptoms that need to be asked to our parents. Frequent snoring more than 3 nights per week, labored breathing during sleep, gasps, snorting noises, observed episodes of apnea, sleep enuresis, especially if it is secondary, as Dr. Rana also emphasized, and cyanosis. These are some of the nighttime symptoms which parents can come up with or we should ask. What I want to stress on are the daytime symptoms which are often missed. If a child has a history of headaches on awakening, excessive daytime sleepiness, scholastic backwardness, attention deficit or hyperactivity disorders, learning problems, these are some of the questions that need to be asked by us to the parents or even to teachers of these children. Some of the signs of OSA are in an underweight or overweight child are tonsillar hypertrophy, adenoid facies, facial deformities, failure to thrive, hypertension, and tone abnormalities, especially hypotonia. There are various screening questionnaires developed for OSA, and this is one of the Children's Sleep Habit Questionnaire is one of them, which can be administered to parents in the OPD to assess the sleep behavior, the bedtime routine, and the quality of sleep. For diagnosis of OSA, polysomnography is the gold standard test. There are some alternate tests also like nocturnal video recording, nocturnal oximetry, and daytime nap polysomnography. But why polysomnography. The clinical signs and symptoms of obstructive sleep apnea may sound specific, but they have a very poor sensitivity and specificity. Because the size of tonsils have no direct correlation with OSA. Sometimes we may have a child with small adenoids and tonsils with OSA, or vice versa may even be true. Secondly, physical examination in our OPDs when they are awake may be normal. That's why an overnight sleep study is important. The second option is alternate tests, which have poor positive and negative predictive value. These tests can be done only if the polysomnography is not available. What are the benefits of polysomnography? It is a gold standard non-invasive test. The objective diagnosis, it is a non-invasive test. It gives an objective diagnosis of OSA, and it can be used to assess the severity of OSA. It can also be used to determine whether any intervention is required for the underlying cause. Post-op evaluation of OSA after TNA surgery can also be done with polysomnography. It provides physiological data in children with hypoventilation, such as children with tone abnormalities, neuromuscular disorders, or any structural problems. Diagnosis of parasomnias and other sleep disordered breathing, and sleep quality in children with hypersomnolence. So what happens in a polysomnography? It's an overnight sleep study where various parameters are recorded. I will not go in details of this, but I would just like to mention that a continuous EEG helps in determining the sleep architecture and efficiency, while these parameters, the oronasal flow, abdominal and thoracic movements, pulse oximetry, help in the respiratory scoring of the patients. Other measurements like limb movements, EMG or EOG, help in periodic limb movement index. The duration of REM and non-REM sleep helps us determine the sleep architecture along with the percentage of recording time spent sleeping. For respiratory scoring, these are the parameters that we calculate by looking at the tracings, and I'll be explaining these parameters in detail. Just a second. Sorry about that. So when we do the respiratory scoring, I hope I'm audible to everyone. So
yes,
when we
audible. Yes, you're audible.
Thank you. So when we do the respiratory scoring, we find out the number of obstructive apneas, which is complete cessation of nasal flow for 2 breath periods. We determine the obstructive hypopnea, which is reduction in flow of more than or equal to 50% at the nasal cannula with arousal, awakening, or a fall in desaturation of 3%. This event is scored as a hypopnea event. Then apnea-hypopnea index is the sum of apneas and hypopneas happening in the total per hour in the total duration of the study. Another terminology is RERAs, which are respiratory event-related arousals. These are a sequence of breaths lasting for 2 breath periods, which do not satisfy the criteria of apnea or hypopnea, but are associated with increased respiratory effort, increased labored breathing, and arousal. And respiratory disturbance index is a combination of AHI and these RERAs reported together. Now, why are these terminologies important? This is because the diagnostic criteria, which is laid down by the American Academy of Pediatrics, involves these parameters. An AHI of more than 1 or RDI of more than 1.5 in children less than 12 years is suggestive of OSA. This criteria of AHI more than 1 is only for children less than 12 years, and for adolescents and adults, it is more equal to or more than 5. Oxygen nadir of less than 91% or a change in nadir from baseline of more than 9% is also suggestive of obstructive sleep apnea. The next category is the maximal end tidal CO2 of more than 54 or an increased end tidal CO2 of more than 50 for 25% of total sleep time. This is the third indicator of obstructive sleep apnea. Hailing from Varanasi, he presented with episodic fast breathing and bluish discoloration of lips, night awakenings and snoring all happening in the night since last 2 months. He had occasional breathlessness since last 1.5 years and was known to have hyperactivity in school. Teachers complained of hyperactivity. He had repeated nose blocks and sneezing, mouth breathing and constipation going on since last 2 years. But he did not have any excessive daytime sleepiness, no night terrors, no inattentive behaviors, no scholastic backwardness or nocturnal enuresis. He was taking short courses of systemic steroids and oral antibiotics since last 2 months, given by their doctors in native places. His birth history, development, immunization were all normal. But in his dietary history, we found out that he drank 2 liters of milk per day, and he was a vegetarian with high fat and high carbs. He actually ate 3 to 4 kachoris every day. He had a BMI of 28.4, which was more than 95th centile for his age, and he fit into obesity category. He had inferior turbinate hypertrophy and grade 3 tonsillar enlargement. On his X-ray, we could see enlarged adenoids with narrowing of the upper airway. His systemic examination was normal. This was a nocturnal pulse oximetry with video recording that we did in the hospital ward. This patient had significant labored breathing, signs of labored breathing. He had some nasal flaring, mouth breathing, snoring, and along with that, on the pulse ox, we could see there is some desaturation, and he had tachycardia as well. What I would like to point here is that despite the fact that he has all these breathing problems and his clinical signs and symptoms are suggestive of OSA, we are still not sure whether he has any apneas or not, even on the nocturnal pulse oximetry. On his sleep study, there were total 93 events, of which 50 were obstructive apneas and 43 were hypopneas. His AHI was 15.8 and lowest SpO2 was just 25%. This was his sleep tracing, where you can see this red line is the nasal thermistor flow, and the next 2 lines are the thoracic and abdominal movements. You can see these episodes which are marked pink, where there is no flow at the nasal cannula, but the abdominal and thoracic belts are moving. Another thing to note is that the saturation after an episode of obstructive apnea, the saturation was going down to 79-77%. So he had some desaturation along with some arousals. So he had moderate to severe obstructive sleep apnea. We did some more investigations for consequences of OSA. He had moderate pulmonary hypertension on his 2D echo, and on metabolic workup, he had high cholesterol and LDL. Endocrine workup, he had signs of early diabetes, raised HbA1c, and fasting glucose. So he was going into fitting into metabolic syndrome as well. So for his obstructive for some lifestyle changes and dietary modifications, his hyperactivity, pulmonary hypertension, and metabolic syndrome, we decided to monitor on follow-up since we had taken care of his OSA to some extent. And for allergic rhinitis, we sent him home on intranasal steroids and LT antagonist. So let's discuss the management of OSA. First line treatment is TNA surgery along with weight loss, especially in obese patients, and management of comorbidities. Second line treatment is nasal CPAP or BiPAP and pharmacological treatment. The TNA surgery is successful in approximately 85% of cases. Removal of only adenoids or only tonsils may not be that useful. Therefore, we should insist on getting complete TNA surgery done by the ENT. In high-risk patients who undergo TNA surgery, admission after the surgery for observation is a must. In children less than 3 years of age, severe OSA on polysomnography, cardiac complications, obesity, failure to thrive, and children with craniofacial abnormalities or neuromuscular disorders. The relative contraindications for TNA surgery are very small tonsils or adenoids, morbid obesity with small tonsils, bleeding disorders, submucous cleft palate, or any other medical condition which makes them unfit for surgery. Reevaluation in patients who undergo TNA surgery is very important. It should always be done, and it is advised to do it after 6 to 8 weeks of surgery. Most of the time, an objective assessment may not be required, but in case the patient has OSA with some sequelae to start with, or has significantly abnormal pre-op PSG where the AHI is very high, maybe more than 20, 30, with significantly low SpO2 desaturations, like in my patient where the SpO2 nadir was 25%. In those kind of cases, a follow-up polysomnography is advised. Child who's obese or has residual disease on clinical assessment, then obviously we will do a repeat polysomnography. The second option for treatment is nasal CPAP. This modality of treatment is advised only after a TNA surgery is done. There is the problems in pediatric age group with nasal CPAP is adherence to therapy. There's a lot of behavioral therapy and logistic parenting that is involved in this, especially in India. There is poor compliance and it requires a significant lifestyle change. Despite all these problems, if the patient has residual disease, if the patient has incomplete resolution of his symptoms after TNA surgery, we must insist on nasal CPAP. And now we have a lot of advanced devices that not only in obese patients, but also in non-obese patients. It has been shown that weight loss significantly improves their cognitive function and cardiovascular stability and helps in patients with metabolic syndrome to reduce inflammation. It definitely improves their quality of sleep. Intranasal steroids and leukotriene antagonists are another modality of treatment in patients with OSA. Irrespective of their allergic rhinitis or asthma or obesity. This was found in a study done in 2011 where intranasal mometasone was given for 4 weeks, and that improved symptoms in patients of OSA. I usually give a trial of 6 weeks of intranasal steroids in children with mild OSA, where the AHI is anywhere between 1 to 5, before I advise surgery. By that time, the parents are also primed and willing for surgery. So the take-home messages from my presentation are: OSA is not a disease of the West. It is very well present in India as well. The incidence, the prevalence was around 10% in a study done in India. AR and OSA have a very high correlation. So whenever we treat a patient of AR, we have to keep our antennas ready to detect any signs of OSA. Always ask for snoring in all patients, especially patients with AR. Polysomnography is a must. Clinical assessment is not enough. And TNA surgery is a small surgery with big results, so we should not shy away from advising TNA surgery to our patients. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Vidika. And if there are any questions by anyone wants to ask anything from Dr. Mandeep or Dr. Ritika, you can unmute yourself and ask. I had logged out for a bit, so I've lost all the questions in the chat box. So Dr. Poonam, if there are any questions in the chat box, please ask our speakers.
Yeah. Dr. Gautam wants to know that you mentioned an oxygen desaturation of 3%. for HI?
A fall in oxygen desaturation of 3%, not saturation of 3%,
Or
but
hypoxemia.
3%
Yeah.
is significant.
And Dr. Chaudhary wants to know what was the complaint for referral to ENT. This is for Dr. Mandeep Rana.
So the patient was referred to ENT because of snoring at night. And in addition to snoring, she was also having some gasping pauses. She was also very restless and had recently started to have some morning headaches. And that's when the pediatrician thought that there might be a component of obstructive sleep apnea, and the child was then referred to ENT. And typically what's done here is once the ENT sees a child who has symptoms of sleep disordered breathing, which at that time is not known whether it's obstructive or central, the child usually comes for a sleep study. And I typically read all the pediatric sleep studies, and that's how that patient came to my attention. It's interesting to note, because that was asked, I must add that when I read the sleep study, we called this patient urgently to come to our emergency room to get an imaging study. And neurology on consult was also seeing this patient, and we found that she actually had a right-sided pronator drift. So there was some signs of weakness. And she had a dissociative sensory loss that actually went along with her Chiari malformation.
Thank you, Dr. Mandeep. Dr. Arun Wadhwa wants to know, can mometasone be given at 18 months of age?
Yeah, so children more than 1 year with severe AR, where they're not improving with regular treatment, we do give mometasone at the dose of 50 micrograms OD.
Probably he wants to know whether fluticasone furoate is better than mometasone in that age.
I always give mometasone furoate because of I feel that works better than fluticasone. Fluticasone, the safety in such small children is not well studied as compared to mometasone.
Thank you, Dr. Ritika. Dr. Gautam also wants you to tell him which X-ray what would be the X-ray you would advise for diagnosis of adenoids?
So we do a lateral neck X-ray of soft tissue neck, where we ask the patient to extend the neck, but not hyperextend the neck completely. So with neck extension, we take a lateral X-ray, soft tissue neck. Yes.
Dr. NJ wants to know what is the role of melatonin in sleep disorders? Dr. Mandeep, would you like to take it?
Sure, that's actually a pretty loaded question. Melatonin is very commonly used as a sleep enhancing agent, primarily for children who have sleep initiating problems. And the reason for that is that the half-life is very short, and once you give melatonin, the effect generally wears off within a couple of hours. So it's most helpful for patients or children who have difficulty transitioning to sleep. It is also used for patients who have circadian rhythm problems, like delayed sleep phase syndrome or advanced sleep phase syndrome, in addition to its use in insomnia. And the dosing that you use for melatonin, if you're using it as a sleep enhancing agent versus using it for circadian rhythm disorders, is a little bit different. So if you're using it for sleep initiating issues, the usual dose can be anywhere from 1 to 3 milligrams. People have used as high as up to 10 milligrams in certain case reports, but generally speaking, once you're past 5 or 6 milligrams and it's not effective, whether 10 milligrams will be effective, it's very, very less likely. For circadian rhythm disorders, especially for patients with delayed sleep phase syndrome, doses as small as 0.5 milligram have actually been found to be effective. The only difference is when you're giving it to help with sleep problems, it's usually given half hour before the desired bedtime that you would want someone to go to bed or fall asleep. Whereas for circadian rhythm problems, especially delayed sleep phase, the small dose of 0.5 milligrams is usually recommended at least 3 to 4 hours before your desired bedtime. And the relationship is because with its dim light melatonin onset, which is a separate topic by itself, but that's the rationale behind it.
Thank you, Dr. Mandi. Dr. Ruhi wants to know that nasal block in a newborn almost few days after birth and then persistent till 2 months of age, growing otherwise well, feeding well, saturations above 95%, chest clear. What can be the differential diagnosis and further workup? Dr. Ritika, please.
In this case, since the child is feeding since he is very young,